And when rapid speed down to 2,500.
Good point. Wherever you reduce speed to 180.
Blackbox.
Hey gang, KP here, KP's Blackbox. Today I've got the honor and privilege to actually interview my father-in-law, Mr. Wayne Fisher Sr. This has been a long time coming, and I know it had been in my head for a while that, man, I got to get Grandpa on the podcast. And I'll tell you a little bit about this. Where it really hit me one day was when you retired, and when you retired from your civil career. And I'm going to tell a little story about that in a little while, Wayne, that I don't know if you know my perspective of watching Kathleen at your retirement. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to share that with you today, and hopefully neither of us cry a whole lot. So
You're already starting to tear me up.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, but it was a cool moment for me to see that and to say, man, it's super important that my kids and my grandkids understand what it's like to honor one of the most important generations in our young society. And part of honor is going back and learning what it was like to be you at 18, 19, 20-some years old in a fighter jet over North Vietnam, or Vietnam at the time. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that today, and a little bit of compare and contrast, and then just learning a little bit about Grandpa's career here. So I'm honored. Thank you for being here with me today.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. As I was telling you before we started rolling the camera, one of the things I like to do, Grandpa Wayne, is honor veterans, and not only veterans, but the families that serve alongside of those veterans, the Emilys, the Paulas, the Kathleens, the Wayne Juniors, who, while we're out there doing God's work, they're back home, supporting the troops who are forward deployed, or even just right here in Conus, doing their job. And the beautiful thing about our country still that I love, 100% still to this day, volunteer force. Now, I know there was draft back then, and I know in the 70s, selective service turned into selectively being told for a lot of young men, especially those knuckle draggers that might have been in trouble in society. And so you can go to the Army or you can go to the Marines.
You talking about yourself now?
I am. And it worked out for me. The Marine Corps was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was a little wayward. I thought I was going to be a college football star, blah, blah, blah. It's not about me today, but military service was absolutely the best for me. It's not for everyone. And less than 1% of our society raises their hand and says, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. So I want to spend some time unwrapping that with you today, and what that young high school, college student was thinking when you go to your mom and dad, and your dad, a sailor, retired sailor. So salute to him.
Submariner.
Submariners. Yeah. Those are crazy dudes.
World War II, man. Depth charge, sinking ships. Yeah, that was my dad.
Yeah, wild. So can we throw a little brown water back for those folks?
To. And to honor those who came before us and have fallen.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you. All right. Let's unwind this thing.
All right.
So, Wayne Sr., Norfolk, Virginia, going through high school. You went to high school where?
Norview High School.
Norview, right here in Norfolk.
Yep.
Is that the Greyhounds?
Pilots.
Pilots. Oh, pilots.
Yeah. I don't think it had anything.
It didn't have anything?
It just was fortunate that that was my aspiration ultimately. But yeah,
Man. So when, as a young Norview pilot, did you get in your head that, oh, maybe I'm going to go be a fighter pilot? How did that unwind for you?
well, it happened way before that.
Okay.
It happened when I was 10 years old, and I knew then that I decided I was going to be a pilot. And I'll try to make it a short story, but my dad and my family was moving from Hawaii to the United States. And the way we get back is we fly on this flying boat called a Pan Am Clipper. It belonged to the Military Air Transport Service at the time. But so we were in the middle of the Pacific heading to San Francisco. And as a young 10-year-old, it was middle of the night, I was awake, and some crewman walked by and saw me that I was awake, and he says, "Hey, kid, you want to go up and see the flight deck?" And I says, "Well, yeah." So he took me forward. I climbed up a ladder to the flight deck area, came into a room brightly lit, full of smoke. Everybody was smoking. It's where the flight engineer, the navigator, a radio guy that were all sitting, right? And I thought, oh, this is not too cool. Then he says, "You want to see where the pilots are?" And I says, "Yeah." So he took me forward and he pulled back a curtain and allowed me to stick my head in there. And it was dark, and it had 1,000 of these instruments all lit up, and two pilots just sitting there serenely looking out over the Pacific Ocean. And I went, holy crap. This is much better. I want to do this, right? And from that moment on, I decided I wanted to be a pilot when I grew up. Wow. And I never wavered from that, from the time I was 10 years old. So.
All right. So you go through high school, you decide that if you got to be a pilot in the military at that point in time, you had to go get your undergrad.
I hadn't decided that it was going to be the military. I just wanted to be a pilot. My mom, principally, and dad said, well, okay, when you're going to graduate from high school and you're going to go to college, right? So that's what I did. I mean, I wasn't, your best student in high school, but I did well, and I got accepted to a number of colleges, including Virginia Tech, UVA, and North Carolina State, which is where one of my best friends was going to go to school. And when it came down to picking a school, I told Mom, I want to go to North Carolina State because my best friend's going to go down there and we can be roommates. And so that was a financial burden for them, but they let me go. When I got there, I found out, I didn't know at the time, but it's a land-grant college. In 1964, a land-grant college has mandatory ROTC for the first 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know it when I showed up, but they said, okay, you're here. Do you want to be in the Army, Navy, or Air Force? I said, I'm thinking I want to be a pilot. Air Force sounds about right. So the next thing was, well, what curriculum am I going to take? And I really had no idea, although I knew it wasn't going to be something like English or history. It was going to be a technical thing. So I looked and, well, here's this thing called aerospace engineering. Well, that sounds like a pilot thing.
Yeah.
So I went for aerospace engineering. And 2 years later, they said, okay, your mandatory ROTC is up, but we here in the Air Force think you did okay. And if you'd like to continue in ROTC, you could possibly become a pilot, and we could send you to pilot training. And I went, okay, that sounds like what I want to do.
Career path of this 10-year-old.
So they signed me up, and I did my last 2 years in ROTC, which, to be honest, meant that once a week I had to put a uniform on, and once a week I had to go to the drill field and march around. And then I had to take a few 1 or 2 credit hour courses, which were very easy.
Not much has changed in the Air Force.
Yeah. And
on this podcast today, as a Marine, I've got to come at you
Oh, I know. Yeah, we build a golf course first, and then build a base around it.
That's right.
The officers' club's got to be in there as well.
Of course.
The swimming pool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I don't even have to pick on you. You know it all already.
more
so.
power to you for going into the Marines. But I've stayed at Marine bases before, and it sucked. So
Yeah.
it's just the way it is.
Usually the armpits of the world, you know.
Right. So the other thing they offered me as a person who was potentially pilot qualified was that we're going to let you take this private pilot course between your junior and senior year. And that way we weed out anybody who may not be inclined to be a pilot, right? And so that was intriguing. And I did that, and I actually got 35 hours of training before my senior year and a private pilot's license. So,
All right, so contextually set this up for me. What year was this? Your
I
freshman
started in '64 and I graduated in '68. So in '67 is when I got my private pilot's license.
Okay. So just for context, Vietnam had started kicking off, or what, around 1955, where it really started.
Well, from my perspective, it was hot from pilot's perspective, 65
Okay.
to 70. Well, the war finally ceased in
70,
like January 73.
73, right?
Yeah.
So was that in your head at all when you got your commercial pilots or your
No.
pilot's license?
No, I'm still focused on I want to be a pilot.
Just a pilot.
And to be honest, like I said, I decided to be a pilot when I was in this Pan Am Clipper, and I thought what I wanted to do was fly a great big airplane like that, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not thinking fighter pilot at all.
Yeah, war's not in your head anywhere at this
No,
point.
becoming a pilot is.
Okay.
So right before my senior year, I had to take what's called a commissioning physical. And I went to Seymour Johnson from North Carolina, and I took a full-blown physical. And the ironic thing was that when they checked my eyes, they dilated them, and the doctor who checked me says, "You know, son, you don't quite qualify with your eyes." I was destroyed. He said, "But you know what? It's really close, and I'm going to fudge a little bit, and that will allow you to do this private pilot thing. It's called a flight indoctrination program. That would allow you to do that, but, you know, I'm just telling you that you don't quite qualify." So I did my private pilot thing, did my senior year, and when I graduated, I was commissioned in the Air Force as a second lieutenant and got orders to go to Laughlin Air Force Base to pilot training.
Wow.
And the whole time I'm thinking...
And Laughlin's in Nevada, right?
No, it's
Or
Texas.
Texas.
Right on the border. Del Rio,
What's,
Del Rio, Texas.
Fallon is Nevada. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
So Paul and I, who are now married, mother of Kathleen and Wayne Jr., right?
Yeah.
We drive all the way to Texas, and the whole time in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you know, they're going to give me a physical first thing when I get there, and they're going to tell me I'm not qualified. And here I've driven with my family all the way out to Texas. It bothered me a lot. So we got there, and sure enough, in the indoctrination process, you know, we get a physical. There's 75 people in my pilot training class, and we are mass-produced given physicals. So we're all on our skivvies, and we're going from one station to the next. And when we get to the eye test, it's basically a machine read line 9. And they're not dilating my eyes or anything, just read line 9. You know, I wasn't first in line. And we're in a line, and line 9 didn't change. And by the time I got there, I knew line 9 with my eyes closed. And I read line 9, and they give me a thumbs up. And I go,
Memorization was great, huh?
I said, okay, this is cool. Next station was blood pressure. It was too high.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, they told me, uh-oh, that's not good. Tell you what, you come back tomorrow, and we'll check it again. And I came back the next day with a really cool dude who said, hey, just lay down here in the dark for a few minutes. And then he snuck in and took my blood pressure and says, "Okay, you're good to go."
You had white coat syndrome, I think they call it.
No, I'm a what do you call it? A cuff reactor.
Okay.
I always have been, by the way, ever since then. Blood pressure was always an issue for me through my 30-year career in the Air Force. I always managed it with diet and exercise all the way through my career. But nevertheless, there I was. I'm now full-fledged member of this pilot training class. So
You made it through.
he told me not to put my hands down on my lap because it might look like I'm playing pocket pool, and I'm not. But it's more comfortable with my hands.
You
down
can
here.
keep. Look, you're the boss. This is your podcast. You can do whatever you want.
All right, everybody on the podcast.
Yeah. He's playing pocket pool.
I am not doing that.
That's
So-
what you do. You're what, 78 years young now?
I'm 78, right?
78. So you can do whatever you want at 78.
Okay, I appreciate
We're
that.
just there. So
So, in pilot training was a blast. I mean, I did well in every phase. A guy that I met the very first day I showed up turned out to be my best friend during pilot training. And when we graduated, I won the Best Pilot Award, the Flying Training Award. I won the Wing Commander's Trophy, which is for the best all-around student. And my best buddy won the, it's called the Academic Award. And by the way, he beat me in academics by one question
oh geez,
in hundreds that we took during the thing.
he's probably never let you live that down. Huh?
And he also won the Military Training Award, which meant that he was the most squared away. I'm going to salute. I'm going to,
Yeah.
be a leader type of guy, right? So between the two of us, we took all the awards, and that led to, well, what am I going to fly next? Well, they tell you that if you're the number one graduate of a pilot training class, you get to pick any airplane that you want to fly.
Mm.
And if it's available in the pool of airplanes that they have for that class, then you'll get it. And by then, I mean, especially after I started T-38s with an afterburner and supersonic and formation flying and doing well, they were telling me, dude, you're too good to go fly a trash hauler.
A trash hauler.
Yeah, you got to fly fighters. And I says, yeah, I think I might want to do that because this T-38 jet's really fun. So
equipment you start out with in pilot training, do you start out like in a Cessna single prop or you go straight
it's
to turbine?
For me, it was a T-41,
T-41.
which is a Cessna 172.
Okay.
And then you go to the T-37. It's all changed now. Now, I'm not sure what the initial thing is, but now instead of T-37s, they're called T-6s, which I've flown, and I'll explain that later. But and then you go T-38. When I was flying T-38s, I flew T-38s that had 2 hours on them, or 3 hours, I don't know, right off the factory, brand new T-38s, right? And it was, to me, I'm flying a supersonic freaking airplane. This is really great, right? So when they provided the list of airplanes available for my class, which is bunched together with two other bases, Laredo and I think Reese and Lubbock. So they have this group of airplanes and says amongst you, however many total group there were, this is what you get to choose from. There were only 2 fighters, 2 F-105s. Nothing else was a real fighter. There were some A-37s and a lot of T-38 first assignment IP, instructor pilot assignments, but only 2 fighters. And so I had picked my first choice, front seat F4.
F4 Phantom, right?
Right.
Okay.
But they didn't have any
Okay.
Phantoms. And by the way, at that time, Phantoms were being manned by pilots in the front and the back. And so if you got a Phantom, you might be in the back seat for a couple of years.
Being
right?
like a weapons guy or
You're-
navigator.
You're a pilot, but you're acting as a weapon system officer.
Got it.
So
Hey, Jake, put up. Yeah, there you go. He, if you want to put it up on the screen here, where Grandpa Wayne can also see. So, F4 is what you wanted to be in,
right, yep.
but then the equipment was F105.
The only two fighters were 105s, right?
Okay. Well, you say two fighters. What does that mean? What do you mean by that? There was only two slots.
There were two F105s
Okay.
for three
This whole
bases.
class.
Three
Got it.
bases.
Okay.
Now I'm not sure where I stood in the queue as the number one graduate of the three bases.
Which plane are
But-
we looking at here now?
That's the F105. Dude, that's my baby.
We also have that
Right,
here, Jake.
right. Now these are F105Gs. They're the airplanes I flew when I was in Vietnam. They are Wild Weasel F105s.
What's the G stand for? So it's different equipment as you.
Well, I mean, initial model was an A, but it never got into production, and then the C never got into production. So the first production F105s were Ds, and they're single seaters, except for a few two seaters that were trainers, right?
Okay.
And then the two seater was called an F model. And then to modify it for the Wild Weasel mission, it became a G. And when they modified it, it got a bunch of electronic gear that allowed us to see radar information. like
Nation
cert-
secrets, right?
Yeah. And so this is basically originally an F-105F.
Now is this
became a G.
a photo of you in this equipment?
It could be because these are the airplanes that I flew. See the tail flash, JB?
JB.
That is Korat 17th Wild Weasel Squadron in 1972. And these airplanes are configured for missions in North Vietnam. That's the Shrike missile. You can see the front end of an AGM-78.
Make sure we get you in the mic there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Shrike missile and an AGM-78.
So this white one here.
That's a Shrike.
Okay.
No, yeah, it's a Shrike. We didn't have harms back then,
Okay.
high-speed entry. And then the very tip of an AGM-78, which was it was a monster 750-pound missile. It was
Wow.
draggy, but it was at the time super sophisticated for
Yeah.
the time. So anyway,
And then cannon, like the machine gun that if you were doing any.
I've got a 20 millimeter cannon with 1,000 rounds at 20 Mike. Yep, right here.
That's a lot of fun too, huh?
Yeah, we can talk about that. I had one mission where I could use it, and I'll tell you about it later. But
Awesome. So
so anyway, where was I? So I got the 105. Excuse me, and I went off to what we call replacement training unit, RTU training, where we learned how to fly the F-105. Right?
where do you do that at?
McConnell Air Force Base in Kansas. En route, I went to Fairchild for survival training. And then I went to Homestead for water survival training. And then I went to Myrtle Beach, where we did what's
For
called
vacation? The Air Force sends you to Myrtle Beach? What the
Myrtle
heck?
Beach for what's called lead-in fighter training.
Okay.
At the time, this is, remember, 1968. Or was it 69? It's 1969. The lead-in fighter training was in T-33s.
Okay. Jake, pull up a T-33.
T-33s were, for lead-in fighter training, were modified to carry rockets, and it had a 50 caliber machine gun in the nose, and it could carry practice bombs. Those are T-33s.
Wow. Now, this looks like the old equipment that I remember in World War II looking, not that I remember World War
No,
II. but-
World War II. This is one of the first fighter jets to get to operational service.
Right.
They're called P-80s initially, I think.
It reminds me of that German aircraft that they were trying to test during the end of World War II. I can't remember what the German fighter was. It a Spitfire?
That looks an awful lot like one of the airplanes I might have flown.
Wow.
So that was just, like 5 or 6 weeks of being able to, now that we're not students, right? We're doing things like tactical formation. We're going to the range and we're dropping bombs. We're shooting the gun. We're flying formation landings, that kind of stuff. That stuff we never did in pilot training. And
There's a guy ejecting there, it looks like. That's pretty wild.
they used it to test ejection seats as well. Obviously, that's in Britain.
Right, the Royal.
Right.
Canadian Navy. Yeah.
So I did that, and then I went to McConnell for a checkout in the F-105. Now, I'm a Brown Bar second lieutenant, and I'm checking into a squadron whose instructors are all 100-mission F-105 pilots from Southeast Asia, guys who had Silver Stars and Air Force Crosses and, had seen the worst of action that was going on over there. And I'm totally in awe, right? And then I go out to the F-105 for the first time, and dude, I don't think you can tell from pictures just how big that airplane is. It's got long legs. I could stand up. I'm 6'1", and I can stand up underneath the wing.
Wow.
And I have to look up into the wheel well. So it was pretty intimidating. And
So was it strictly a fighter, or was it like a modified fighter bomber?
it's a fighter bomber.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you quickly that it was designed initially to be a high-speed, low-altitude penetrator of bad guy airspace to deliver a nuclear weapon. Because it had a bomb bay. It had a bomb bay that could carry
Open up and drop ordnance.
a bomb. It was
One. Okay.
put a nuke in there, it opens up,
You only need one.
drops
Right.
a bomb, right? So when I flew the airplane, that mission had largely gone away to other airplanes, and we put a fuel tank in there, which is we needed more fuel for sure. So I spent 6 months checking out in the F-105. I remember to this day my very first flight in a single seat F-105. I'd had one or two in the back seat just to feel what the airplane feels like.
Yeah.
You can fly it from back there. But when they put me in a single seater and say, "You're going to go, you're going to do it on your own now," I can remember the excitement and being at the end of the runway and holding the brakes, and my legs are shaking like this, and until it's time to go and release the brakes, light the afterburner. Now, the F-105 had a J75, and it had a hard light. I mean, when you light the afterburner, nozzles open up, the airplane kind of takes a pause because the nozzles opened up.
And all this air.
And then all of a sudden it starts shooting fuel in there, and boom, it goes off, and you get a kick in your ass like this, and then down the runway you go. And then the next thing you do, if the weather is hot, because it rolled a long way, we had water injection. You flip a switch, and it starts pouring water in there, and you get an extra 5,000 pounds of thrust.
Because of steam and build up combustion.
Well, if you want to talk scientific reasons, I don't want to
You're
get
the
there.
engineer. You're the aeronautical engineer. Educate us here. What's the science behind that?
It kind of allows it to generate higher temperatures because it's being cooled initially.
Right.
And you get, other airplanes use water injection. The tankers, KC-135s, used water injection. Some commercial airliners initially used water injection. It allows the engine to develop more thrust, and let's hold it at that because we can get way too technical. I've left my aerospace engineering degree behind me about 60 years ago. Okay, so
The plane's just enough speed to rotate, right, to get it off the ground.
it
That's the
gives
key.
you more speed, right? Until it runs out. I only had like 26 gallons of water, and trust me, when you run out of water, there you go. Oh, baby, that gives me memories. That's cool.
That's what we're here for.
That's right.
Bring those memories back.
When the water runs out, it's kind of like, and then you get, oh, good. Okay, water's gone, but now I'm up and away and cleaning up, and so.
Now, you haven't flown in a while, and you and I have talked about this before. Does that make you miss it?
In a way, but no. Do I miss flying? No, I don't. I mean,
That's interesting.
I was in an aviation career for 52 years, right?
I'm 54 years old. You did that my entire life.
52 years.
Wow.
And I flew over, I don't even know how many, but over 50 different types of airplanes. And
So are you saying 50 different types of equipment? You guys say equipment in your world, right? So the equipment you flew, 50 different frames?
Well, the ones that I primarily flew during my career, I flew the F-105, the F-4, the F-14 next. I had a 2-year exchange tour with the Navy.
The Navy.
The F-15 and the F-16. But I also went to test pilot school, and I had an opportunity to fly the F-100, the F-101, the F-104. I flew the A4 in the Navy. I flew the A7.
F-111, the swing wing one, did you do that?
I flew it in one part of my career when I was an inspector.
Yeah.
Where they treated me like God because they wanted to do well on their inspections. I said, I want to fly an F-111. So I flew an F-111F out of RAF Lakenheath back in 1987, 88, somewhere along those times. I dropped bombs. I did TFR, terrain following. Yeah. And
Wow.
I got to fly it and land it. I had an instructor in my right seat, but he didn't have to do anything because it flew like an airplane.
Right.
He just helped me get it started is all. So where were you?
We're back in that 105. We're taking off those.
Right. So very exciting 6 months worth of training.
Now, do you know you're going to Vietnam yet?
Okay, that's a good segue. Yes, I'm what's called pipeline to Vietnam. And so we know that when we graduate in 6 months that we're going to go to Vietnam. But what happened while I was there, this is like 69 to 70, they had made at the time, classified decision to pull all the F-105s, all the strike airplanes out of Vietnam and just use the F-4. The only F-105s they left in theater were Wild Weasel airplanes, the guys who went after SAMs and radars and things, right?
SAMs are surface-to-air missiles.
Yes, right.
So that's what the North Vietnamese were using to try to knock the air superiority of the U.S. out of the sky.
Right.
Okay.
So that meant that before we graduated, we were told, dude, you're not going to go. And we can't tell you why, and we figured it out, but you can't tell you why. But what you're going to do is you're just going to stay right here at McConnell, and we're going to convert your squadron from a training squadron to an operational F-105 squadron. And you're just going to stay here and do what operational pilots do when they're not in combat. And that was the case. I mean, so 1971, I flew F-105s in Kansas.
Would this be somewhere in that area? I see Thailand here on this.
All right, well, this one is
squadron.
when we're just about to the point where it's 1971 and things are heating up over there, and all the guys that were flying F-105 Wild Weasels are rotating out, and they needed more pilots. And we, as young F-105 pilots now, had accumulated 400 or 500 hours in the airplane. We're flight leads and everything. And so they needed more pilots. And instead of sending us earlier, they now said, okay, now you have enough experience, we can make you a Weasel pilot. And at the end of 1971 is when they started tapping the resources at McConnell, me amongst one of them. And this picture was taken in early 1972 after I'd gone to Weasel training and went to Southeast Asia.
Okay. How old was this Wayne here then? So I'm guessing in your 20s?
Oh, yeah. 72, it's math in public, but 76, 30, I was about 24.
24,
25, something like that.
So that blows my mind. A 24-year, I think of Isaiah serving in the Army. I think about when I called you and was like, hey, I want to marry your daughter. I was 21 as a young Marine. But knuckle dragging, ground pounder, doing that stuff. They're taking a 24-year-old, putting you in, at the time, that was probably what, a $50 million airplane? I don't know. I don't have no...
Oh, they're much cheaper back then.
They were cheap. Yeah.
But still, yeah.
A lot of money,
yeah.
inflation adjusted, right?
Sure.
So during that period, you've got this young 24-year-old in a piece of equipment carrying out orders, as mandated by Department of Defense, and we'll keep it at that. What was going through a 24-year-old's head in this equipment over Thailand, over North and South Vietnam? Can you give me some emotional aspect of what most guys like you were thinking?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as a person looking to advance his career in the Air Force, we all wanted our chance to go to combat because that's how you got to click or check that box, right? But we weren't getting that chance because they pulled the 105s out. But then when they started turning the spigot on again because they needed pilots to fly Wild Weasels, we thought, oh, okay, this is cool. But you have to remember in 1968, that's when they stopped the serious bombing in North Vietnam. And it became something different for about the next 2.5 years. They were just interdicting supplies on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and, doing stuff in South Vietnam. There was no going north anymore. All the books that were written about the horrific losses that we sustained and the bombing going on in the north were from 65 to 68. So here I am in 1970, early 72, going to Weasel training, going to Southeast Asia to be a Wild Weasel pilot. It was like, no big deal because we were flying in a fairly benign environment. And so, no, I wasn't too worried about it. But things changed, and I'll explain how I found out that happened. Mm-hmm. I had read all the books from the previous going north stories, particularly about 105 pilots, and I was in awe. Well, I'm glad I don't have to do that. I'll just be over there doing something more benign, right? I finished Wild Weasel training, and I went to Guam, Clark Air Base, for jungle survival training. And while I was there, big announcement was they sent this great big strike of B-52s and lots of support aircraft into North Vietnam. They had just turned the war on again because the North Vietnamese are being recalcitrant on peace things, and so now we're going to bomb the crap out of them. And I went, holy crap, it's getting scary again. And I'm thinking, here I'm about to show up when things are getting scary again. So I went into Thailand to Korat after survival training, and I was met at the airplane when I landed there by my best friend from F-105 training, who had gone to the Weasel class just before mine. So he'd been in karate for maybe 6-8 weeks. He met me at the airplane, we hugged and said, good to see you. And he said, I'll show you around the base. And he took me to where my hooch is and, pointed everything out. And then he said, I got to go. I got to get some rest because there's a big mission tonight. And he got shot down that night. My best friend from RTU. It turns out it was another big strike up near Haiphong with B-52s, and the Weasels were doing SAM suppression and supporting them. And
What was his name, Grandpa?
Al Matija. You can look him up. He was MIA for years, and then they finally classified him as KIA because they never.
How do you spell his last name?
Mategaa.
Can you look it up, Jay?
Mateja.
What was his rank?
Captain.
So Captain U.S. Air Force Al Matija.
Yep.
And he flew 105s?
Yep. He was a Wild Weasel pilot,
Wild
just
Weasel.
like me. Right?
Okay.
So that was my introduction to Vietnam. I'm in Thailand, but the first day I show up, my best friend shot down and lost. So that started a year of what was constant. Every mission I flew was over North Vietnam. Every mission, 128 of them for the next year.
So in 1 year, you did 128. Is that sorties? Is that what that would be defined
Yeah,
as?
yeah.
Wow.
Well, I did more sorties than that because, I flew locally. I checked out some guys and everything, but combat missions, 128.
That's
Right,
a lot.
128, all over North Vietnam, right?
Wow.
So at the time when I showed up, first thing you do is you do there he is, that's Al.
That young, and he was in his he was 24, 25 years old when he got shot down.
Same age as me, yeah.
Wow. Salute to Al there.
So you fly a mission, you fly a sortie in country, in Thailand, show you where all the bases are so you know where you have to divert if you need to divert, that kind of thing. And then you fly what they would hope would be a milk run with an instructor pilot in the other airplane. Now, you're in your own airplane, but however, at that time, we hadn't, all of the surface-to-air defenses of the North Vietnamese had pressed south because that's where all the action was. So around the DMZ, they had a half a dozen known surface-to-air missile sites. So a milk run wasn't so much of a milk run because on my very first supervised mission, I had 2 SAMs shot at me, which fortunately weren't guided well, and I had no trouble evading them except that I used a lot of gas to do it. So I got a little bit below bingo, which was the amount of fuel that you should leave to go get more gas. And so I got dinged on my report card saying, oh, he went below bingo. And I'm going, Jesus, guys, I'm on my first combat mission. I had to evade 2 SAMs, and you're dinging me for using too much afterburner. But that's the way my tour started. So I knew I was in for some interesting times for the next year. Yeah.
Wow. So that year goes by, and in that year you flew 128 sorties. Year 2, so now you're probably senior guy in theater, right?
Well, I'm a captain, and there's lots of majors and lieutenant colonels, and the bosses of the wing are colonels, right?
When did they start pushing you out of the aircraft and they're going, no, you've got too much rank, too much to lose?
That was years later.
Okay.
That was years later, yeah. Hell, that was the fallout from the end of the war was we had a bunch of old guys because after my tour, we started up another wing at George Air Force Base with F-105 Wild Weasels that came out of Southeast Asia. and we were inundated with lieutenant colonels, doing captain and major's jobs because they were all heads in the weapons system. But
what's interesting about the Air Force?
I became
well, go ahead.
experienced while I was there because once I had a dozen or more missions and new guys were coming in, by virtue of the fact that I've been there and done it, more experienced. And I later on became a guy who led missions and, and did some of the bigger things that happened, right?
What I wanted to get your insight on, just in taking a little detour, and we'll come back, and I want to talk about the Thud pilots and talk about a series that was created around your unit. But it's always been really interesting to me that you take your very expensive officers and you put them in equipment that puts them in harm's way, where typically officers are doing more leadership stuff, and you're enlisted. Like in the Marine Corps, I think of an infantry unit. You don't put your captain at the front of the battlefield, at the tip of the spear, we'll call it. They're going to lead. They're going to be there. Going to be in the battlefield with you, but you're going to send your trained enlisted troops. What was it, and do you know in military history where commissioned officers would go into aircrafts and the enlisted men would work on them? How did that transpire? Do you know?
I'm not sure when it transpired. I just know that when my time came around and I came into the Air Force, if you were going to be a pilot in an airplane, we had warrant officers that flew helicopters.
Okay.
In all the services, even the Air Force. But if you were going to fly any kind of airplane in the Air Force, you had to be a commissioned officer. I don't know how or why that transpired. That's just the way it was when I came in.
Gotcha.
So I mean, lieutenants, captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels, I mean, we flew the missions, right? And the colonels, if they were leading by example, who were the real leaders of the large organization, they were flying as well. Robin Olds was a colonel. He was a wing commander, and he led Operation Bolo and shot down all those MiGs. I mean, he led by example, right? So, yeah, if you were a lieutenant or a captain, you were kind of junior in the rank structure, but you were flying the same missions. And if you had flown enough of those missions, then you could be leading a flight with majors and lieutenant colonels with less experience. It happened all the time. I did it, right?
For me, Grandpa, it's take the rank off, and underneath that greeny weeny flight suit is a son, a father, right? A 24-year-old, and I think about that today, that the awesome responsibility that your nation put on your shoulders to say, hey, young buck, I'm going to send you into North Vietnam, into harm's way, in this super expensive piece of equipment, relatively speaking, to the times. Did you ever think about it? Like, man, I am 24 years old, flying over North Vietnam, getting shot at. Was there ever a point where you're like, this is actually a little frightful, I'm scared, I want to go home? Was there what were those emotions like?
Okay, well, was I scared? Yeah. I mean, at times. I didn't think of it in terms of a big, political scheme of things. Like, I'm here because I'm a military officer. I'm a pilot doing what I love to do, and this is my mission, and so I'm going to go do my mission, right? The times that I was scared, okay, well, they were, I can highlight several of them.
Was there any grudge, like when your best friend gets shot down, it's MIA, later KIA? Was that like, I'm coming to get you MFers? Did you have any of those emotions?
I had emotions, and I wouldn't categorize them as like, I'm going to go get you and do something stupid to go get you. But losing Almateja on day one kind of just opened my eyes and said, oh, dude, this is serious business that I'm about to embark upon. So I need to do it best I can. And then,
if you want to come home, be a professional.
And losing Tom Zorn is another one.
Tom Zorn?
Tom Zorn, Zorn. Losing Tom Zorn has caused me nightmares and borderline PTSD, which I have gotten over. But
I haven't heard this one. How so? Can you unwrap it a little bit?
Okay, so I want to jump too far ahead, but this is like in September of '72. By then, Tom Zorn and I, and it's funny, it's not funny. Tom Zorn by then was my best friend, right? We had jungle survival together. We played golf on the weekend, and then we showed up together, and we both progressed well in checking out and became flight leads, and then we both became stand eval officers, the guys that actually do check rides on the other guys, and so we were doing really well, and we had this mission where Tom was going to lead, and I'm going to be his wingman. Did we find Tom?
Yeah. Jake's going to pull him up here, yeah.
Tom's leading, and I'm number 2, and we have 2 F4s on our wings, because by now we'd developed a tactic called hunter-killer, right? The Weasels only carried missiles, and the missiles required a radar signal to home in on. And they were getting smart, and if they knew we were in the area and they were up and we could target them, they could actually see the missile come off the airplane. They would turn the radar down. So we had 2 F4s that had CBUs and bombs, and they were our wingman. And if we could locate a site, then they could go out and they could bomb the crap out of it and kill a site, right? So it was one of those hunter-killer missions. And we had covered a strike into North Vietnam near Hanoi, and we were actually egressing towards the Gulf. And the F4s had not expended their ordnance, and they departed to do some road recce to see if they could find the target. And the weather was fair weather Q, but there was Q. It was, you couldn't see clearly if there was a cloud in the way. And what happened was we heard from the F4s that they had indications of a surface-to-air missile launch. And so, can you see?
Yeah.
I'm about 3,000 feet.
Yeah, camera. Bring it back. He's doing some hand signals here. That's pilots would do.
That's right. We're over what's called Little Thud Ridge, just north of Haiphong. We're looking because we've got indications of a SAM launch. And out of a cloud, in level flight, off to my right, 3 o'clock, is an SA-2 just in full blower. And I see it and go, it's only like a few seconds away from intercept. And I brake hard right. And I note that Tom seems to do the same thing. Brake like this, and the missile goes, and it blows up right between us. And right behind it, within a second, is a second missile. And it blows up right behind Tom. He immediately says, I've been hit. He rolls out, heads towards the Gulf. I roll out. We're going as fast as airplanes can go towards the Gulf. Tom says he's been hit. He's talking to me. He says, am I on fire? I said, I don't see any fire, but I see smoke or streaming fuel. I can't tell which. We finally make it feet wet, about 4 or 5 miles. And
what does feet wet mean?
Over the water.
Over the water. Okay.
Over the water, yeah. Over the Gulf of Tonkin, just off Haiphong, kind of north of Haiphong. There's a bunch of islands up there.
Okay.
So we're within 3 or 4 miles of land on 2 or 3 sides. But he says, I got to get out. And I'm 2,000 feet off his wing. he says, I got to get out, and I see the airplane do this, and then boom, I see 2 ejections. I see 2 chutes, and I'm doing the SARCAP. I'm calling for rescue. Big Mother is the Navy helicopter stationed on a destroyer in the Gulf, and he's en route, and he says, hey, I got the chutes in sight. And I go, I'm bingo minus, meaning I've got less fuel than I should have to get the hell out of there.
You seem to get that a lot, the bingo. So.
The F4 guys have more fuel. They see the chutes. They pick up, and then I depart to go find a tanker.
Mm.
That's another story, the whole tanker thing. But the rescue did not work. They were apparently taking the air-to-air artillery, kind of lowered the guns, and they were shooting the shit out of maybe even the guys in the chute. They were shooting at the helicopter.
Jeez.
They dropped a PJ. The PJ almost got lost, but they couldn't recover either one of the 2 pilots, Tom Zor being one. Mike Two Rose was his backseater. And I noted that, so we don't know what happened, but we do know from the PJ's report that neither one of them had released themselves from the chute. There was a light breeze, and they were still being pulled along. The guy that they tried to recover by dropping a PJ was under the water, so he hadn't deployed his LPU, and there was blood in the water.
Mm.
And they never got to the other guy, whichever one was which, because they were taking shelling from shore and almost lost a PJ, almost lost a helicopter. Bottom line was the helicopters recovered their PJ. They got the hell out of there. They never recovered Mike or Tom.
So technically on this site, he's still unaccounted for.
Well, he was eventually declared KIA, but
Okay.
he might have been declared KIA early because of the report. But anyway, I'm leaving very skosh on fuel, and I asked Red Crown, which is the destroyer that directs traffic from the Gulf, for vectors to a tanker. And he says, sorry, I can't help you. I'm busy with search and rescue. And I'm going, shit, I know that.
Yeah.
So he said, contact the tankers on their primary frequency and do your own intercept. So I tried to contact them, couldn't raise them. I used guard frequency, which everybody's supposed to monitor. I couldn't raise them. I used the mode in my radar that the tankers have a beacon, and if I select this mode, my radar, which is not an air-to-air radar, it's an air-to-ground radar, but it can pick up a beacon, right? So I pick up their beacon, and I do my own intercept, and lo and behold, I came across a cell.
You're like, thank God.
I see 3 tankers, stacked up like this. That's what they fly in cells, like this. I pulled up on the last tanker, still not talking to him. Pulled up on the co-pilot side, and I looked at him, and I gave him the I need fuel like this, like emphatically. And I slid back, the boom came down, I moved over. By the way, I'd punched everything off by now. I was in a clean airplane, no tanks, no missiles, no nothing. We had punched everything off. I pulled up, got hooked up on the boom, and when I got hooked up, my fuel gauge was reading between 300 and 500 pounds. And the manual in the F-105 says, if your fuel gauge gets to 500 or less, it's unreliable. You don't know how much fuel you have. So if I actually had that much fuel, the 105, if I'm not an afterburner and I'm just cruising along at tanker speed, I'm burning 100 pounds a minute. So I had 3 to 5 minutes of fuel when I hooked up on that tanker.
Jeez.
I really thought that I might be punching out over the Gulf that day. But that guy gave me a full load of internal fuel, and I went back to Karat and never talked to the tanker guys. I wish I could have. I wish I'd have met them at a bar. I'd have bought drinks for them all night long. And then I was stunned and shocked to learn that they didn't rescue
Couldn't find
Tom and
Tom.
Mike, right?
I'm sorry.
And like I said, I've had thoughts and concerns over the years about that because I was wondering if there's something that I could have done that would have made the outcome different. Because, like I said, it was like last minute. I mean, there it is, couple of seconds out, full motor is just burning big time, like it is shot this missile, and I broke hard into it. And my mind says he broke hard too, but I never said, Sam, brake right. I never said that because I was like, oh, shit, I broke. And then the missile blew up, and by then I figured, okay, he knows what's going on. And then another missile was right behind it, and it guided on Tom. Could have guided on me, but it guided on him. So that's haunted me over the years.
Sounds like a tough one. He was in his 20s as well.
Yeah, same age as me. Yeah.
Wow.
Mike, 2 rows, same thing. Yeah.
So this story you're sharing, there are many like it, not to diminish, Tom or his family, salute to him and his backseat guy, Mr.
Mike 2 rows.
Mike Two Rose. So salute to them and their family. There was a series, and I'm jumping ahead again a little bit with you here, but there was a series a couple of years ago that was created on Netflix called Thud Pilots, right? Jake, can you pull up that Netflix series? I don't give a shit if they tell us it's copyright. Yeah. But I'd like to get your opinion on this series. I watched it in tears and awe, and then I thought you were in that era, but you and I hadn't really talked in depth yet. And then when I found out that, you were actually a thud, it gave me a whole different perspective, and it's what really brought back, like, man, I got to get Grandpa Wayne in here to talk.
If I recall, this series basically focuses on that 65 to 68 time frame when the F-105s were doing all of the air-to-ground bombing, including White Weasel stuff. But this was before they pulled 105s out and brought in the F-4s. So it was slightly before my time. I got there after the break and then the start of Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2. But a lot of the same pieces were still in place. I stayed in the same base that a lot of that film was done. I'm very familiar with, and a good buddy of mine is Roscoe, the dog, which I think is featured. Roscoe was in the same briefings that I was in, and the story goes that if Roscoe, the Wings mascot, if Roscoe was asleep in one of the briefing chairs, it was going to be a piece of cake mission. If Roscoe was restless, it could be a tough one.
Jake, look up Roscoe Thud 105. I know you're worried about copyright stuff, but I would at least like folks to be able to know where to go and see.
I'm working on the Netflix series now, getting that pulled up.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, Roscoe was...
just a stray, like German Shepherd or some mutt?
Somebody early on, like in the early, 65 time frame, deployed to Korat and carried a puppy in his airplane.
Oh, jeez.
And that's how I understand Roscoe got there. And Roscoe just became, he had the run of the base. He was in the officers' club at dinner time. He was
Smart dog.
In briefings. Roscoe lived a life of Riley as the 388 TAC Fighter Wings mascot. So.
That's wild. So I think Jake found him here.
Top dog at Karat. Yeah, that was Roscoe.
Top dog of the 388th Tactical Fighter. That's awesome. So it looks like First Lieutenant John Henderson wrote a story about it. So what is this, Jake? 34th Thuds blackbox.us/Roscoe if you want to go check it out.
See, I saw it. That some say he came in the back seat of a F-105. I don't know if that's a true story or not, but however he got there, he became endeared to everybody at Karat. So.
Wow. So you got to meet Roscoe?
Oh yeah, I've fed Karat, Roscoe at the table at the Officers Club many times. Everybody did.
So little things like that, like when you're forward deployed, you're there with your comrades. Was little things like that, did that kind of make, the humanity of, like, did it make life kind of come back to normal when you had things like that around you?
Right. Okay, so my life tour in Southeast Asia was not like a Marine or an Army guy in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Not like that at all. I lived at Karat Air Base in Thailand. I lived in an air-conditioned hooch with a hooch maid who kept my place clean. I had an officers club with a swimming pool. I would land from a mission and they'd stick a beer in my hand and put a cold towel around my neck. I was only in harm's way and scared crapless 5 to 8 hours a day, depending on how long the mission was.
Only 5 to 8 hours a day.
Only 5 to 8 hours a day. Right. So, did we let off steam while we were on home base? Yeah. I mean, too many bar stories that you don't even want to hear about. But, I mean, Christmas 1972, my God. We had more people go to the hospital with cuts and bruises because of things like, and I almost hate to say it because it's ingrained in me, but I'm going to say it, and if there's any fighter pilots listening, forgive me. If you say dead bug, anybody who hears that has to hit the floor on their back, arms and legs in the air, and the last person down buys everybody else a drink.
Oh, shit. That can get expensive.
So, I mean, if I was amongst my peers and we wanted to discuss that thing, we would call it deceased insect because that's a freebie. But if you say dead bug, you hit the floor. Well, by then there's broken glass on the floor and some drunk would yell out dead bug and everybody hit the floor. And then we also did carrier landings. I never did because I was more subdued. But I would hit the floor if they yelled dead bug. I didn't want to have to buy a round. But carrier landings is when they put a bunch of tables in the club together and slick it down with beer and liquor, and then you go running and slide
Like a slip and slide.
Exactly. Except it was a carrier landing, right? So, a lot of people went to the hospital. One guy in particular, he thought it was pretty cool if he just, there was a bricked sign in front of the O Club that said kaboom. Karat Air Base Officers Open Mess, kaboom. He thought he would kaboom that thing, so he ran at it and did a flying body block, put him in the hospital for a week.
Oh, geez. Now, there was a reputation for these thuds. You're talking about the fun O Club shenanigans. But these thuds had a reputation for being able to take a massive beating from, small cannon fire, surface to air stuff. Is that true? I mean, were these planes really resilient in terms of the?
Well,
here we go. Yeah.
Anytime you bring back a battle damaged airplane, the airplane gets reputation for being resilient against. But a lot of airplanes got shot down too. So I mean, I got hit, and the airplane flew normal for me.
So Jake is showing the series here, the Thud series,
Right.
and they did this docu-series around the time right before you got there, if I recall the conversation with you.
I know several of these people that are in that series. There's no doubt about it. Like I said, I had old head 100 mission guys.
In your unit that you recall, how many pilots did you lose I mean, you told us today about 3.
Yeah. We lost more airplanes than pilots. The guys got picked up. We lost. So we had only the one squadron, and it had
How many's in a squadron?
24 airplanes.
24.
Well, maybe it was supposedly equipped for 24, so they have some spares. So we had maybe 30 airplanes. We lost 6 at least airplanes. We lost Al and his backseater, Tom and Mike. We lost Jim Cutter and his backseater, but they were picked up and became POWs. We lost a guy over the southern part of North Vietnam who basically E&E'd for about 3 or 4 days, but they finally rescued him. It was a big, big rescue effort. We lost that airplane. We lost Tom Cody and his backseater when they were egressing over the Gulf, and they were being pursued by a MiG who was being very aggressive coming out over the Gulf because he could have been threatened by a Gulf ship, a Navy ship. And I'm not sure of the whole circumstances because there were rumors one way or the other. But Tom did a hard break for what he thought was to evade a missile, an air-to-air missile. And in the process of that break, he jettisoned fuel tanks. And one of the tanks came off weird and wrapped around the leading edge of his wing.
Jeez.
And the result of that was he couldn't lower his landing gear because it was trapped with this 450-gallon tank wrapped around his wing. And he wound up doing a controlled ejection off the coast of Da Nang, and they picked them both up. Mike Basilovac and his front seater, I can't think of his name right now. We lost him, so about 6 airplanes.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's 20% of your airplanes, right? So
Wow.
it was.
Yeah, when you put it in that category, I mean, that's one is too many, right?
Well, you know, the mission is suppression of destruction and suppression of surface-to-air missiles and radar threats, which included things like radars that did early warning and all that kind of stuff. And we, as a result of our mission, were always the first ones in, and we were always the last ones to leave. And to be frank, the only sure way of locating a surface-to-air missile site, because their tactics were, if we're around, we're going to shut our radars down, and we turn them on for a little bit and see what's going on, then we'll turn them down so we don't get one of those radar homing missiles in our lap. So the only sure way was for us to fly around and get engaged, right? And if we got engaged by a surface-to-air missile, which happened frequently, then typically we could see where they were. Mm-hmm. And they weren't engaged in the strike force, whose mission was to go in and strike a target, right? So
are you kind of saying that you go out there like a setting duck, like
yes,
bring the fire on,
yeah,
and then your buddies in the F4s can help?
That's what we did.
Yeah.
Yep.
Playing a little bit of chicken.
Right. Got engaged by 5 SAMs. The day that I probably, by the grace of God, didn't die but could have was that day. And surface-to-air missiles, the SA-2s, were either command detonated, meaning the guy in the radar shack says, boom, that's an interception.
It's close.
And it hit, or it's proximity fused, right? They were either or, they weren't both. They were either or. And a command detonated missile, the 4th one that we evaded over Hanoi, missed me by less than 100 feet. the lethal radius of the missile was 300 feet. Missed me by less than 100 feet.
Because of its debris field when it throws off all its shrapnel.
But it didn't blow up until it passed underneath my nose. Shock wave made my airplane go boom, 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 and then it blew up over there, right? Missile number 5 blew up right in front of me. And I flew right through the fireball, and it knocked off about that much of my left wing,
Holy cow.
and it put some holes in the front of my airplane. Except for my radar, which by now we're egressing, we're getting the hell out of there. Everything worked. Light controls, engines, everything, Flew home with a broken wing, but still worked.
That's wild. You were talking to Kathleen the other day. There was this unfortunate incident over Brazil, and the aircraft went into a flat spin. And I listen to these stories like this with a portion of your wing missing, the front fuselage is battered. You're shaken as a pilot, I'm sure. You're scared, right? You're like, shit, will this thing get me home? When I've heard you say this before, like when planes typically go down, it's not the equipment, it's the operator.
Not always, but I'll tell you that airplane that you just mentioned, the one that did the flat spin with 52 people on board, those guys were idiots.
So they killed everybody.
I think so. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, they flew into icing.
This is Jake pulled up some video here. Oh, hey, Taylor Swift. Yeah.
There
So
it
what
is,
what do you call it? That's called a flat spin.
That's a flat spin, no recovery for that airplane.
Now, had he had more altitude?
No, once that airplane got into a flat spin, there was no recovering it.
Jeez.
I saw the whole thing, not the official
How do
investigation.
you lose air? Like, I mean, that's the air over wing air.
So
Engineering class again.
They flew into an area of known icing, and icing built up on the wings. And as icing builds up on the wing, it destroys its ability to generate lift like it's supposed to. So to compensate, as the airplane got heavier and was losing lift and he's trying to maintain his altitude, he just increased his angle of attack to stay at the altitude he's supposed to be at. So he's flying in, he's getting all this ice, he's just angle attack until he got to the point where the airplane stalled, okay?
Jeez.
The airplane stalled. Now, he could have recovered from that, but apparently not because there's so much ice on the airplane.
No chance to nose over.
He never really got enough speed to start flying again, given that his wings are corrupted. And this is where, he put himself in a bad situation. Maybe he could have recovered if he just got enough speed so that the airplane would fly with that crap on his wings, right? But undoubtedly my opinion, he says, oh, I'm going down too fast, and so he pulls up again, stalls again. He kept doing this until he stalled so badly that the airplane went into a spin that developed rapidly into a flat spin. That's a flat spin.
He's a paperweight at that point.
Airplane is not flying. It is just falling like a rock.
Yeah.
Right? So
Wow.
you shouldn't have ever gotten there. You should have, coulda, shoulda, the kind of things. Everybody has stepped further into a situation than they should have or could have if they'd have done a little bit of pre-planning or thought about it. Even me, but in his case, he's in an airliner, and he's just flying on.
So this is a commercial airline. That's why I bring that up now. Is progressing through the career, you make it through Vietnam. Thank God, because if you'd already had Kathleen, so I'm safe there. So thanks for doing that first.
And Wayne Jr. was born while I was over there.
Yep. Shout out to Wayne Jr.
It was the middle of the night, flying back from supporting the B-52 strike. It was fairly benign, and I'm on autopilot cruising across Laos, and I have to check in with the command post to let them know mission complete on my way home, and then they said, stand by for a message. And they said, congratulations, you're the father of a baby boy. And I remember I went, Yahoo! On the radio. So that's how I found out that Wayne Jr. was born.
That's awesome. And Kathleen, where were you when Kathleen was born?
Okay. Kathleen hasn't told you this story?
She may have, but we're going to tell it to the world now. So
Well,
tell it to her grandkids and your great grandkids.
Paula might have told you the story. Okay, so we're at, checking out in the F-105 at McConnell, like I told you, and Paula's pregnant and getting close to the birth date, and she's a little overdue, so they decided they're going to induce labor. Well, it turns out the date they decided to induce labor, I'm already on the schedule that morning for an early flight to go to the range and shoot the gun and drop bombs, right? And she's supposed to show up for prep at like 6 o'clock, and I have like a 6:30 brief, and I was assured that, well, once they start inducing labor, it's going to take 3 or 4 or 5 hours before the baby's born, right? So I'm going to go fly. So I dropped Paula off, went to fly my mission, briefed. I'm out on the ramp, and I'm climbing up the ladder to get in my jet, and a truck comes racing up. Lieutenant Fisher, I think I'm a lieutenant now. Maybe I'm a captain, I don't know. Captain Fisher, gotta hurry up. Your wife's giving birth. And on the one hand, I'm going, oh, shit. I'm going to miss a range sortie. And on the other hand, I jumped in the truck and off I went. And I got to the hospital just after Kathleen was born, and they brought her out. This is before the day where everybody's there while you're giving birth.
Yeah.
I learned my lesson. After Kathleen and Wayne Jr., I'm always there for Katie and Daniel. Right?
Yeah, round two.
But I missed Wayne Jr. because I was in Southeast Asia, and I missed Kathleen because I was so caught up in going to fly my sortie. And she went quicker than she was supposed to, but Kathleen came out all bloody, looking like a mess.
Yeah.
Just as I got there. So anyway.
So Kathleen, when I'm going to fast forward 52 years, 53 years. Well, Kathleen's 19 still. She's never broken through 19.
She looks 19.
She does. She's beautiful.
She
and
looks great, yeah.
Yeah. Thank God she looks like her mama. So I'm just... She looks like, it's kind of scary how much she looks like you. But we're at your...
You know somebody else that looks like Kathleen? Sarah. Oh, God.
Oh, my God.
I met Sarah first thing. She was the first one here. And, I mean, my God, the first thing I thought was, even the way she talked and some of the things she said, and I said,
yeah,
that is Kathleen. Right
so
there.
many people, and I 100% agree. I told you I have two mothers. I have Kathleen at home who still keeps me in line. Need that. And then when I get home, I have my work mom, who's my daughter. And Sarah keeps you in line around here. But your second retirement, your civilian retirement. I'm looking over at Kathleen while this one of your friends, coworkers, is reading. I don't know. I'll call it a warrant. And I look at Kathleen, and she's bawling. And I'm like, babe, what's wrong? And she goes, I had no idea my dad was a hero. And then I start doing this. And
No hero.
yeah.
Plenty more like me. and
Well,
better for it. Right?
Lots of you, lots of heroes, lots, and I don't even remember exactly what was being read in that, and I think you probably have it at home somewhere. But the impact that one little moment that day had on me, looking at a daughter who'd never really heard her dad's story and serving, two things kind of went through my mind. Number one, I'm going to come lovingly put my foot in your ass and be like, hey, Grandpa, you got to start telling, and not just you, it was every warrior at whatever level, from the sky or to the guy crawling on the ground. It's why I do a lot of these type podcasts now. I've got a very, very close friend that I wish I could release his podcast to the public. We did 8 hours in the studio one day, and it was talking about his naval special warfare career, and he wanted to give his kids, his grandkids, his mom and dad a glimpse into 33 plus years serving in naval special warfare as a SEAL. And I was like, let's do it. We got to do it. You have to do this for your family. So that's part of what I wanted to do today was I wanted my kids, my grandkids, your great-grandkids to be able to look back and just have a glimpse of what it was. And you know, we've got this technology today where we can capture moments theoretically into perpetuity and be able to go back and share. And I think generationally it's important. Number one, it's important for people to understand that war sucks, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. You had friends who lost their lives, who, you know, children grew up fatherless. And then even on the other side, our enemies who were fighting for whatever belief system they had, good, bad, or indifferent. They lost too. Their kids lost. There was somebody's mother who lost a son, and some spouse who lost a husband, and vice versa. But I think it's important that we pay honor and tribute to those who, a young 24-year-old, you didn't understand the politics of why you were there, and it really didn't effing matter. But you answered a call. You answered the call of a 10-year-old who just wanted to fly an airplane, and that was a way for you to get there and a way for you to do it. So I'll get off the sappiness of that now and move into, in your commercial career, and I remember when you retired from the Air Force, and you were down in Buenos Aires, one of your last tours. It wasn't your last, but that's when I had to call you and say, hey, can I, and I was a young Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps. Can I marry your daughter? And you've never met me face to face. You don't know who I am.
Is that where I was in Buenos Aires when
you were in Buenos Aires?
You actually sprung for a long distance phone call.
I did.
So I feel like, well, that's a plus.
Yeah, that was super expensive too. As a matter of fact, there's a funny. It's not my podcast. I'll tell you one off camera about the debt that Kathleen and I got into talking on a little phone booth in Guantanamo Bay in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. AT&T would give the troops these calling cards, and I was like, "Oh man, how nice of them."
There was a bill that was
Little did I know, I got home, and this is the early 1990s. I had a $1,000 phone bill talking to Kat for 6 weeks, and hard lesson learned. So, for you, when you retired, and you did 31 years Air Force,
30
years,
and 6 days.
In 6 days. Who's counting?
Well, mandatory retirement, right? I mean, as a colonel, you can only go 30 years.
Yeah. Was there ever the aspiration to be a general?
Well, you know, I was on a path that could have led me that direction, but I didn't really think that I was the politically enough savvy kind of guy that could do well, but I never thought I couldn't do it. And so I'm not sure if I would have pursued it or not, but I had a detour that changed everything while I was flying in Spain.
What happened?
You want to know that story?
Yes, we want to know that story. Your grandkids want to know that story.
Well, if you're a captain of a ship and you run aground, even if you were in your stateroom because you needed an hour's worth of rest, you're fired, dude, because you're responsible for it, right?
Okay.
Well, that's accountability, right? So I was responsible for 3 fighter squadrons at Torrejon Air Base as the director of operations. Now they call him the operations group commander. Right? There were only 2 people in the wing higher than me: the wing commander and his vice. And so during my tour, we lost 5 airplanes. Right? None of them I would call my fault. I mean, it just shit happens, right? We had an engine failure. We had a guy who G-locked. You know what that is?
No, what's a G-lock?
G, loss of consciousness.
G-loss, okay.
Right. He was doing basically a G warm-up, but didn't prepare himself and just put himself to sleep. And when he woke up, it was too late. He hit the ground.
Jeez.
Actually, 2 engine failures. Shit happens. But the one that put a real damper on any aspirations I might have had, even though I don't think I strongly had these aspirations, was a mid-air collision between 2 guys in a squadron, one of whom was an experienced instructor pilot and a really up-and-comer. He's one of the higher-ranked guy in terms of super good guys that I had in my wing, and a young guy, a lieutenant, who was a hair-on-fire, balls-to-the-wall fighter pilot kind of guy. Both of them excellent pilots, but they got scheduled to go fly off as a 2-ship and then do 1v1 air combat maneuvers, basic fighter maneuvers, right? They got into a real furball, fought until they ran together, lost both airplanes. One guy was killed. The young guy was killed. The way they crashed, it disabled his ejection seat, and he pulled the handles until he hit the ground because it wasn't going to work, right? The other guy jumped out. I was the initial board president because I'm the senior officer in the wing that does that kind of crap. I'm out there starting around, and in the cockpit of the guy who was killed, I find that the videotape that they used to record events, the HUD and all that kind of stuff, was still intact. And I recovered it. And when they downloaded that video, we found out that these guys had 2, maybe 3 engagements prior to the midair where they were blatantly violating rules of engagement. They were just going for it. You're supposed to maintain a 1,000-foot bubble from the other airplane. They were in slow speed scissors inside 500 feet, just until one situation where they got into a situation, both of them just basically hanging on thrust, and neither one of them could get away. And the airplane, the young guy, this airplane, the horizontal stabilizer cut across the back of the canopy, lost this airplane, but in doing that, it damaged the ejection seat, wasn't going to fire, and he was killed. This guy ejected. Well, that led to an investigation, and it turns out there was some lapses and discipline and behavior in the squadron that these guys were in, that the investigation uncovered. And the bottom line was they fired flight commander, the operations officer, number 2 guy in the squadron commander. They fired him. And by the way, the squadron commander was about to take over, or was about to depart, and a new squadron commander was going to take over. But instead of a change of command, they just fucking sent him away. And And then about 6 weeks later, about 2 weeks before I'm about to go permanent change station back to the States, right? Wing commander calls me in and says, I'd like you to, move out of your office and let your assistant take over, because when I go to outbrief this accident, I want to show that I've got a clean slate.
Oh, geez.
So he, in essence, he fired me, but it was a soft fire. It wasn't one of those where it went into my record,
Yeah.
except word of mouth gets around, right? But I was fired. I knew freaking well I was fired because, I'm the guy at the top of the chain, right?
Yeah.
And this guy was there to clean house, and so he wanted to go away with a clean house. So I got fired. And it wasn't 6 months later, I'm now at Langley doing a good job, doing really well. The general loves my work, calls me in and says, hey, dude, they're looking for some people in leadership positions, and your name's on the list, and I'm here to help you out. I'm here to support you, to be a vice wing commander and maybe a wing commander. And I said, boss, I'm changing gears, man. I'm looking at things like professor of aerospace science or an air attaché or a defense attaché, which is what happened. I wound up
In
being
Buenos
a defense
Aires.
attaché in Buenos Aires, because here's the thing. As soon as you put my name on the list, they're going to find out, what happened at Torrejon. And, I just don't want to go through that. So that's how I changed gears. And it turns out my 3 years in Argentina is like epic. It was like,
Yeah, you
was a
love
tough-
that. I've heard you talk about that a few
no,
times.
it was a hard job, a lot of work, but so many great memories. And
So is it true that when you're like a defense attaché in another country, and Emily, your second wife, my stepmother-in-law, I guess we'd say in the order of things, she was a major in there. She was an intel officer, correct?
yeah, she got out as a captain when our daughter Katie was born, right, to be a full-time mom.
Yeah.
But she stayed in the reserves, and she did good reserve years for the full 20. And, yeah, she was by then promoted to major in the reserves, and she maintained her active reserve status and got a 20-year retirement as a reservist. Yeah. So
Good for you.
she was
Mom.
actually working
Yeah.
but only once a month, right?
So when you both were down there in that attaché position, is that like being an overt spy in another country? Is that like
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's what we are, right?
Yeah.
We're overt spies. We're intelligence officers. But everybody knows that's what attachés are. And my job, and I was evaluated on how well I was doing my job based on how much intelligence information I produced. And
How would you like to be the attaché in Brazil now?
in Brazil,
Or in Argentina, or I mean Argentina.
No,
you know what I'm saying?
I am 78 years old, fully retired. I don't do anything to make the money that comes into my house every day. And I have no desire to do something like that again. I mean, I can always talk about the good things that I did and why it was such a memorable experience. But I can also tell you all the things that were really difficult for me. I mean, I wasn't there a month and didn't know crap from Shinola when they told me, you're going to be the ambassador's point man and project officer for the visit of Colin Powell and his airplane full of people, right, in a month. And talk about stress and dealing with lead security services and motorcades and setting up visits with high-ranking Argentine officials, a lot of pressure. And I can tell you some very interesting stories about that visit. But when it's all said and done, it was actually a very beneficial thing for me because it got my feet wet early on, and I learned a lot. I learned that I love Colonel Powell. He's a cool dude.
Yeah.
Right. I learned that he didn't like our motorcade leaving the airport and fired his head of security because of that motorcade.
Really?
Probably wasn't his fault. But,
Interesting.
and I'm in the back seat of my armored Chevrolet with my driver, with Colin Powell leaving the airport at the head of a motorcade with a whole bunch of Argentine cops into tremendously clogged traffic that these security people thought, well, we'll take care of that. And they were beating on windows and moving cars out of the way, and we sped away and left about a 15-car motorcade back in the traffic. And we got to the hotel a good 10 minutes before anybody else in the motorcade. Well, Emily was in the second car with Colin Powell's wife.
Oh, boy.
And I can remember Colin Powell just saying, "Where's my wife?" And I said, "They'll be here, sir." "Where's my wife?" I'm sure they'll be here in a minute, sir." And I said, this is while we were riding the car, I says, "Do you?" Because this was shocking to me. I mean, my driver thought it was his job to stay with the policeman on a motorcycle who were just basically forcing people out of the way.
Yeah.
And he was just staying up with them. And I said, "Sir, have you ever experienced a motorcade ride like this?" And he kind of went like this. "Yes. Madrid." So we get to the hotel, and we get him to his room. His wife's still not there. Finally, the rest of the motorcade is showing up. The lead security guy comes walking in. He's a black guy, and I swear he almost looked like white.
Oh, jeez.
He goes, "Oh, my God, that was terrible. Did General Powell say anything?" I says, "No, actually, he's pretty calm." I mean, I asked him if this was like an unusual, and had he ever seen anything like this before, and he said, "Yeah, in Madrid." And the guy went, well, apparently Madrid went really bad, and they fired the head of security on that one. And he went, "Oh, my God," and bigger than hell, he was fired.
Wow.
Yeah, so anyway, but that trip, I'm going to digress a second, but that trip, the Argentines assigned a brigadier general in the Air Force, a brand new brigadier general, who could speak passable English, which was good for me because my Spanish was barely passable.
You had an intensive course in Spanish before you went.
6 months
Yeah.
from scratch, taught me how to speak conversantly, but I struggled, right? So anyway, me and this guy are like stuck to Colin Powell's hip for the whole week that they were there. And it turns out this guy was a really cool dude, and we got along really well, and he enjoyed the same kind of things I did, like hunting and fishing. And he says, "I know a guy who knows a lot about fishing and some good contacts, and you have an airplane. We could fly up into the Andes and go on a really cool fishing trip if you want me to set it up." And I said, "Dude, that sounds really great." So I know this brigadier general in the Air Force. That's a contact, right?
Yeah.
And that's cool. He called me up a week or two later and said, "This other colonel is the guy who's going to set it all up. When do you want to do it?" And we set a date. And then he said, "Can I bring along another person? He works in the Ministry of Defense. He's a civilian." I said, "Sure, more the merrier. I got 6 seats, and we'll fly off and go fishing for a week or 4 or 5 days, whatever it was." So we show up on the appointed day, and it's this brigadier general. It's me and my Navy captain, naval attaché, flying the airplane, and 2 other guys. This colonel, who he says is the guy who has all the contacts and is an expert fisherman, and this civilian. And we're all just dressed like this, getting an airplane at this small satellite airport where I keep my airplane, and pile in, and off we go to Bariloche, Argentina. And we land, and I note that there is a whole entourage of military people there. Turns out they're Coast Guard people. And basically I park, and they sort of set up an honor guard and roll out the red carpet. And I'm going, man, this is really something for a brigadier general, right? So I was instructed who to get off first, and it turns out it's not for me or the brigadier general or anybody else. It was for this civilian guy, who by now is a buddy of mine. You know, we're like, hey, fish, how are you? Blah blah blah. You know, I've been talking the whole time. So we get out, we get escorted up to this chalet up in the mountains with a chef and 2 bartenders and a big meal set up. You know, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really something for a fishing trip. And then the next day, instead of getting into some skiffs to go out and go fishing, we get into this like 40-foot cabin cruiser, and, you know, with a bartender and food, and we're just going to troll around the lake. And we wind up spending the night at a national park just by pulling the boat up on the shore. And this guy, this civilian guy that I didn't know very well except from just the last day or two, says, oh, yeah, man, we need some steaks and some mollejas, which is a sweet bread that they cook over the grill, and it's really good. And so he makes a radio call, and the Coast Guard shows up and sends them off. And the Coast Guard goes away, and they come back, and they got more beer and food. And we have a cookout over an open fire. And a national police boat drives up, says, you guys can't stay here. And the guy walks over and says, I don't know what they said, but I think it was kind of like, you know who I am? And it went away, and we stayed in a restricted national park, you know, not supposed to do what we're doing.
So who was this guy?
Well, that's the best part of the story. Is about a month later, you know, Jorge, I think his name was, Jorge and I we're asshole buddies, right? He even invited me to go play golf at this golf course where he's a member. And about a month later, I'm reading the newspaper, and there's a big shakeup in the Ministry of Defense. The Minister of Defense, who I didn't know personally, fired his deputy, and the new Deputy Minister of Defense is Jorge.
Oh, boy.
He's the number 2 guy in the Defense Department, right? My buddy, right? I'm an intel guy. My job is to find context, right? So in the first 2 months, this brigadier general is a good buddy of mine. This colonel that he hooked me up with, who knew all the things about fishing, turns out he's the executive officer to the chief of staff of the Air Force.
Oh, wow.
So my good buddy sits in the office with the chief of staff of the Air Force and the deputy minister of defense. They're all my friends and contacts, and we get together for lunch, and they tell me shit, and I write reports. And it turns out I'm a freaking hero in the attaché business in the first 3 months. Now, that didn't account for all the misery I went through to set that visit up and all the stress involved, but it developed context that lasted through the entire 3 years I was there. And
those guys still living today, or are they around?
As far as I know, we kind of lost contact with each other after a few years. But
and I guess in that position too is when you leave, there has to be some. Because I mean, it seems like you could really have the potential for personal gain in some of those relationships.
Oh, man, you're
years
bringing
later.
up stories. I have another story to tell you real quick.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it's supposed to last, but
We're breaking the rules. It's okay. It's for you, Grandpa. We can go all day if you want. We'll do an 8-hour one again. I don't know.
well, I mean, a lot of significant things happened while I was there, and because I was the defense attaché and the senior military person in country, you know, responsible to the ambassador and everything, I got a Defense Distinguished Service Medal for that. That is, in fact, the 3rd highest award in order of merit. The only two things higher are the
We have that down here.
Medal of Honor
Yeah.
and the Air Force Cross, and then the Defense Distinguished Service Medal. Right. So anyway, I was proud of that. But when it was all said and done and time for me to leave, about 6 months prior, when I'm getting into the assignment cycle, I got a phone call. My secretary took it, and she says, "Sir, we got General Vasilio on the phone, wants to speak to you." And I went, "Oh." A 4-star general in charge of Air Training Command at the time. So I said, "Yes, sir, Colonel Fisher." And he says, "Hey, Wayne, good to talk to you. Look, my wife and I had a tour in Chile when I was younger, and we fell in love with this folk singer who's an Argentine folk singer. And we had a CD or a cassette tape, and we lost it in one of our moves. And I was wondering if maybe you could look around there in Buenos Aires and see if you could find this folk singer. I would really appreciate it because we love that, you know." And I said, "Sir, yes, sir. I'd be glad to do that." And I sent off my driver, who came back a couple hours later and said, "Here it is." So I called up General Vasilio. I said, "Sir, I got your tape. Where do you want me to send it?" He said, "Oh, man, Wayne, I really appreciate it." So I sent him the tape. He got it. Called me up again. Got the call. It says, "General Vasilio's on the phone." He says, "Wayne, I got the tape. Thank you so much. How much was it? You know, I'll send you the money right away." And I says, "No problem, sir." And then he said, "What can I do for you?" Well, I went, didn't think of that. I says, "Well, sir, I'm in the assignment cycle, and when I go back, I'm going back to the States for one last assignment because I don't want to retire from overseas. So I'm telling you that I want to go back to a last assignment. I'm not looking for a do-nothing assignment. I would love to have a good assignment." And I says, "But I won't guarantee you more than a year because that's all I need after my tour here to be able to retire. But I do, you know, I want a responsible job if I can find one." He says, "Okay, I'll see what I can do." A couple of weeks later, I get a call from the colonel's group and said, "You got a by-name assignment to AETC to be the director of requirements," which is kind of what I did in TAC before I went off to Argentina. Turns out I spent 3 years in that job. Awesome job. Loved it. Retired at the 30-year mark. And all because I bought a video
Argentine
tape.
little video. Yeah.
I just got a tape for some 4-star general. Yeah. That's how it works.
Let's look at your distinguished service here. So those of you that don't know, this is what you would refer to as the shadow box.
Yep.
So there's a lot of, the Marines, we would call this a salad bar right there in the middle with all the dressing there of your awards. Can you take us through those just so my grandkids and great-grandkids
Okay, well,
can know a little bit?
I think I know the top ones, but once we get further down, some of them are like, if you were there, you get one kind of thing.
Right.
But the first one is the Defense Distinguished Service Medal.
Third highest medal.
Third highest,
Served to
right.
the Air Force.
The next one is the Legion of Merit. The third, I've got 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses. Those are for distinguished flying in combat, right? I think that's next one is a Meritorious Service Medal with an oak leaf cluster. That means I got more than one.
More than one, yeah.
Right. And then I got air medals, a whole bunch of air medals, like 11 or 12 or 13 air medals. And those typically aren't for single specific actions. They're more like for you fly 10 combat missions, you get an air medal kind of thing, right?
And you flew over 100 and...
I flew 128.
28.
Yeah, so maybe I got 13 or so.
Wow.
I lose track. And then the rest, I dare say I would get it wrong if I tried to go through it, but, I got Air Force Commendation Medal, Navy Commendation Medal, probably a marksmanship kind of thing, a Defense Service Medal.
Marksmanship.
Vietnam.
You mean like from your airplane or from your handgun?
No, you had to shoot the weapon before you went over there, right?
Got it. Okay.
So,
I'm just teasing
yeah,
you a little bit.
right.
Have some fun with you here.
And then, very proud of that patch right there. Not everybody got a chance to wear 100 missions over North Vietnam patch, but that's the patch that had me in awe the whole time that I was in training as a lieutenant. And these here, of course, are just
Ribbon
the
replica.
ribbon part of those,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like I said, I did do a 2-year tour with the Navy where I flew the F4, F-14, A4, S2, and the C1.
Wow.
Current in all 5 of them at one time, which is something you don't do in the Navy or in the Air Force.
That's wild.
I even flew all 5 of them in one day.
Did you really?
Yeah. I flew 1 versus 1 air combat 3 times. Each time dissimilar. One time I was in an A4, one time I was in an F4, one time I was in an F-14. And each time I fought a different kind of airplane, either an A4 or an F4 or an F-14. And at the end of the day, they says, we got the S2 broken at Lemoore. Can you and, Joe Schmo here fly up to Lemoore in the C1 and fly back the S2? And so I flew the C1 up, and then my buddy flew the C1 back, and I flew the S2 back. So I flew all 5 airplanes in one day.
That's wild.
Don't do that too often nowadays. Pretty much one airplane.
One airplane your entire career, right?
Typically,
is kind of the
typically.
track now.
Right.
Any significance to the to the flag in here? To the American flag?
It was flown in an airplane, and to be honest, I can't remember. Or flown. It was.
Well, it's one of those places in the airplane.
You got to give me a break. I mean, I retired 26 years ago from the Air Force. So
you've got grace. We'll give you that today. That's all right. So, from a butter bar to a colonel, at any stage in your career, what rank do you think was like the most significant to you? Like, man, it was so much fun being a captain, or being a colonel. Where did you enjoy your service the most?
Well, the most significant milestone for me was, I went to pilot training, went to F-105, had a combat tour. And then I came back to the States flying Wild Weasels. And the 105s were older airplanes, right? I really wanted to fly newer stuff.
Yeah.
But we couldn't get out of the 105 because it was a weapon system that was going to be phased out, and they didn't want to bring new people in. They're just going to keep people there. So me and a couple of my buddies says, well, let's apply to test pilot school. Maybe that'll get us out of here. We did, and me and my buddies were all accepted to test pilot school, and off we went. We were actually in the same class together. One of those buddies was Paul Metz. Jacob, you better Google or do something with Paul Metz because
METZ?
METZ, yep. Very significant individual. So I went to test pilot school.
What was his rank?
He was same rank as me.
Okay.
He was a captain.
Captain,
and
okay.
I'm a captain. And about halfway through the school, fighter pilots.
I'll move this down.
Fighter pilots typically checked out in the T-38 and the F-4 initially, dual qualified as a student in test pilot school to do your syllabus missions, right? And so we're somewhere down the syllabus, and I got recruited to fly the F4 with an instructor in my back seat to support a test mission that was being done on a dry lake bed near Edwards.
Okay.
And it had something to do with wake turbulence and all that. So I'm flying these passes at low altitude at different speeds. And when it was all done, by the way, this place is actually inside the control zone of Edwards. Right? When it was all done, the guys on the ground said, "Hey, could you do one more pass, but this time make it kind of fast?" And the guy in the back seat said, "It's okay with me." I said, "Roger, okay." So I come around and I do this 400 or 500 knot pass at 50 feet over the lake bed. Now I'm inside a control zone where basically you're not supposed to do anything over a couple hundred miles an hour, right? And I pull off, and they were happy. I come in, land. When I get into the squadron, I'm told immediately that I've got to go see the commandant of the school. And I go, holy shit, I've been violated. That's what I thought, right? And when they told me to go see him, that's what they were implying was the problem. You're like, what did you do, kind of thing. So I went in to see the commandant, and he had this stern look, like, what did you do? And I don't know what to say. And then he broke into a smile and he says, "Hey, man, we're just pulling your leg. We just found out that you made major 3 years below the zone." I had no idea I was even in the, promotion. I just got promoted to major 3 years early.
Wow.
I went, holy cow. So that was a significant thing.
That's pretty huge.
That 3 years early, everything else I made after that was on time with no sweat, never worried about making a promotion. But I was a pinned-on colonel at 18 years, and a normal person wouldn't be a pinned-on colonel until 21 or 22. So after that early promotion, I always did a good job and did pretty well, but I wasn't like, still burning. I figured, dude, you got such an advance here, we're not going to make you early over here, I guess. Or maybe I just wasn't good enough for an early promotion again, but I wound up basically at 18 years, which is...
That's awesome. Now, you were bringing that back to this guy, Paul Metz, too.
Paul Metz, yeah. Paul got out of the Air Force early, got hired by Northrop Grumman as a junior test pilot, flew the Tiger Shark and something else, just through various accidents and things and test pilots getting killed. He wound up, in a short order, becoming their chief test pilot as a very young test pilot because the guys ahead of him all got killed. I mean, that's a true story.
You just rank up by...
Right. But Paul's a smart guy. I mean, don't get me wrong. He deserved it. So he wound up being the chief test pilot for the YF-23, which is the airplane that you saw in one of the pictures.
Okay.
Yeah, that...
Yeah, Jake, bring that back on.
No, that's an F...
is that a Raptor?
F-20, that's a
22?
That's a Raptor. But initially, he was in that airplane, the YF-23. He flew the first
light gray.
He flew the first flight on that airplane.
Wow.
But then they lost the competition to General Dynamics, now Lockheed Martin, right? To the F-22. And as soon as that happened, he got hired away to be in the F-22 program. And then he actually did the first flight in the production model F-22.
Wow.
And he flew the F-22 a whole bunch. And he flew a whole bunch of other stuff. And but yeah, he's a pretty famous test pilot. And he was my buddy.
Is he still with us?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So is he in his 70s now, too, I guess?
Yeah,
Okay.
same age as me, yeah.
Still flying airplanes?
There you go, only man who flew both, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Wow. That's really cool. So you've got all these guys around you today? Do you guys get together?
See that guy right there? That's Sandy Sandberg.
I've heard Sandy Sandberg.
Sandy's. He and I were at VX4.
Maybe I've heard you talk about him.
Because he's a Marine guy, right?
Oh, there's some politics for you on the
Yeah.
screen while we're at it.
He is the guy who flew the C-1 back when I hopped into the S-2.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because we were both in VX4 on a Navy exchange. He's a Marine, and I was the Air Force guy, right? So the Marine and the Air Force guy flew the Navy airplane up to Lemoore, and we split seats and flew him back. But yeah, Sandy, one more quick story. Sandy and I were flying ACM 1V1. He was in an F4, I was in an A4. And we were doing our fight, and I'm doing an A4 thing. It's a tactic, right? He has got kind of a bite on me. I'm maintaining my energy in an A4, 400 knots or so, just keeping it. And he's saying, I got him now. And he's pulling. He's losing energy. And before he gets into where he can make a shot, I went vertical like this, and he followed me up. But he followed me up with less energy, and I had a lot of energy. I get to the top. I think, holy crap, I screwed up because I'm about to go to 0, and that's not what you want to do on an A4 because it could do a flip-flop and turn out into an inverted spin. But I just kind of held on, and it flopped down, and then I got my speed back, right? Well, it turns out he did the same thing, except he got out of energy sooner, and when he fell, it departed, and he lost control. And one of the things you do when you lose control at an F4 is you deploy the drag chute, and it gives you that drag, and it gets your nose pointed down.
Yeah.
So when I finally recover and I'm headed downhill, I'm looking about 2,000 feet in front of me, an F4 going downhill with the drag chute coming out of the back end like this. And I go on the radio, Fox 2 on the F4 with the drag chute hanging. And I played that tape 1,000 times in the squadron for everybody else, right?
Now that's at 2,000 feet, closing speed 400 knots.
Oh, we weren't closing on each other. We were both recovering from zero airspeed situation.
Okay.
We were both accelerating at about the same rate. And at 2,000 feet, it's like 99% probability sidewinder kill right there.
That's awesome. So you get through this Air Force Navy career, Navy being that you went through Top Gun. Didn't you also have a chance or a time where you were in the astronaut program, or at least got an opportunity? I remember something about that.
No,
I'm not making that shit up.
No, I never applied to be an astronaut. At the time that I would have been a good candidate was shortly after we all graduated from test pilot school. And my buddies, not all of them, but Brewster Shaw, another good friend and buddy, Mike Mullane and Jerry Ross. They were all in my class. Jerry Ross was an engineer. So was Mike Mullane, and Brewster Shaw was a fighter pilot. Those three guys all got selected into the astronaut program, and they all became very successful.
And so I wore my NASA shirt today. Right. So I didn't have an Air Force one, Grandpa, so I apologize.
But not me. I didn't because, to be honest, at the time, I wasn't sure I would be a good candidate, right? Because they do these extensive physical, flight physical thingies, and I was allergic to bee venom, and I've been fighting blood pressure my whole life. I always maintained it while I was in the Air Force with diet and exercise, but I was always borderline, and I said,
Who wants to be in outer space
Yeah.
with a
Well,
blood
yeah,
pressure?
who's good? You know, they're going to give me a physical and say, yeah, I like your record, but So
Yeah.
I didn't want to put myself through that. And besides, I knew, and it's a fact, every one of those guys that were pilots, for the rest of their career, the only thing they ever flew was a T-38.
Oh, jeez.
And then maybe one of those lifting body simulator things where they're not really qualified. They just sit in the seat and they fly lifting body approaches. I wanted to fly new technology, high tech. I wanted to fly F-15s, F-16s, that kind of thing. And
So when you retired from the Air Force, I remember you went the airline route, commercial airlines, and you got picked up by United, correct?
right.
And you got checked out in a 777.
Well, first as an engineer in a 727,
Okay.
and then I fleeted up to be a first officer in a 727. And then they were going to retire. I was based out of Washington, D.C., and they were going to retire the 727 fleet out of D.C., right? And the rules are, this is all airline stuff, right? The rules are if your domicile closes, then you get a bump to any other airplane in your fleet or in the airline
Okay.
where there's somebody who's junior to you, right? So that's a good deal. I'm a relatively junior guy, but if I can find an airplane where there's a guy who's junior to me and I want to fly that airplane, I can just automatically go to it. Well, 777, which is like right at the top of the best paying and newest airplanes, there was a guy who was junior to me. So I went to the 777, which was great. Favorite airplane. 727 I really liked. Old school, round dials, no glass, unique characteristics. 777, all glass, magic stuff, push buttons, airplane does it by itself. I mean, really
You're a
cool.
passenger, called a pilot.
Could be, yeah. So I really enjoyed that. But then 9/11 happened, and then I got bumped off the 777 because they were furloughing people. I lose seniority. They bumped me to the 757, 767, which I flew for a while. More people furloughed, lose seniority. They bumped me to the Airbus, waiting for a training assignment to the Airbus. 1 week before I was to go check out in the Airbus, I got bumped again to the 737. So I never went to the Airbus. I waited and waited for a training assignment. By the time I finally got to the 737 for training, I'd been in the 75, 76 for like 3 years, which was cool, right? I stayed in there a long time only because they were just moving people down the chain so long that they never could find the training class for me. So I wound up finishing up flying the 737. So I flew the 727, 737, 757, 767, and the 777 in the 7 years that I flew for United Airlines.
I think out of every pilot I've ever met or know today, you have flown more equipment than anybody that I know. That's pretty amazing.
Well, that's because you don't know Paul Metz.
Well, Paul, he's got you beat. All right.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure a lot of those test pilots, but for a guy who didn't stay in the test pilot world, I mean, that's a
Right.
lot of
Yeah.
aircraft to fly. I wish I could spend more time with you today, just talking through this and capturing more. I probably want to bring you back, and if I can drag you in here, we'll do a longer.
Well, we covered a
Session.
lot of stuff. I mean, I'm not sure there's much more of significance in my life other than the 4 kids that I managed to birth. So
Well, you can thank those ladies also. They had
They helped.
some yeah.
they helped. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is for Kathleen, for Wayne, for Katie, for Daniel. We didn't get to talk much about Daniel today. Sorry, Daniel, but and Katie. But 2 beautiful young people. I call them young people.
Yeah, I'm old, so they're getting older too. But
Right.
but they're all good kids.
So when you
proud
talk
of
to
all
your
of them.
kids, Grandpa, you talk to, your great grandkids today, knowing what you know today, the time that you got to serve, that 10-year-old boy who set a goal and met his goals. If one of your grandsons or granddaughter walked in here today and said, Grandpa, I want to be a pilot. I want to serve in the military as a pilot. What are you saying to him?
Absolutely, go for it. I didn't try to steer any of my kids any particular direction, but I would be proud if they went that route. You know, to say that somebody decided to follow my footsteps. Well, I knew Katie was never going to do that, right? I was just happy that she's a smart young lady. Daniel, on the other hand, I probably spoiled that dream when.
You gave him a basketball too soon.
Not that when he was young, I practically forced him to go with me on a roller coaster. He didn't want to, and he didn't like it. And from that time on, he said, Dad, you could pull those G's. And no, I can't do that. So I still lived a lot of my life vicariously through those kids.
Yeah, don't we all? Well, we look up to you. We thank you for your service. And I'm really, really grateful that you came in and did this with me today. And this will be something cool for me to be able to give to my kids and grandkids as a reminder. And every chance I get to do this with any veteran, I don't care what level of service. It's for me. I think we need to have moments of history within families and clans captured, and in a way
my
that we can
pleasure
share.
to do this. One of my favorite things is talking about my experiences. So, but I've been accused of just offering it up, but I don't think I do that. I need to be asked, so that's why this is a great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, you answered the call, and we appreciate it. I know the kids will be great.
And you know how you can tell a fighter pilot, right?
Oh boy. Okay. How so?
He'll tell you.
He'll
And I find that's
That's right.
Hey, well, what did you fight? Well, I flew fighters. Yeah. What'd you do? Well, Air Force. I was a fighter pilot. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Not many people get to do that. So, thanks for sharing your stories with us, and
Thanks for having me, Kenny.
salute to all your buddies that we lost,
Yeah.
and to their families who've carried it on. And this is a little part of carrying on their story too. So,
And make sure you reinforce the fact that while my hands weren't here, I was not doing anything illicit. while they were
no, that's on you. I don't know what was going on over there while we were talking. You had a smile on your face the whole time. So, hey, thank you so much. We love you. It was an honor and privilege to do this with you today. So,
Well, thank you for having me, Kenny.
salute to you, sir.
I love you too.
I broke my salute before you got a chance. So, bad Marine. All right, Grandpa Wayne, we'll let you go. Thanks for the tomatoes. The best tomato canner, his side hustle after retirement was specialty with.
No, they don't
Canning
get,
tomatoes.
They don't get sold. They get given away as gifts.
We'll take them. They're delicious. All right.
All right.
Take care.
Tell me when we're off channel here so I can.
No, we're going to catch you in these awkward moments. Take care, guys. See you soon.
Blackbox.